All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the 10th and final episode of the first season of This, That, and the Other, and what a journey it has been so far. My name is Varun Chandra Mohan, your host for today. This, That, and the Other has been a series that tackles some of the biggest and most controversial challenges HR and senior managers face within an organization. And so far, we've covered a range of topics. We've covered affairs at work, we've covered side hustles while being employed, we covered what does it take to be successful in business, gender diversity and equality, sustainability, ethical marketing, dignity of work, what does it take to get promoted, and last week we spoke about cracking the innovation code. This week, we're going to be talking about myths about engagement. So do send us your question throughout the session using the chat box on Microsoft Teams, and we'll cover as many questions as we possibly can. And thank you to those who have already sent us some questions, and we'll try and throw that in during our session today. Should you have any questions or clarifications after the session, that's cool too. Just send them across to us. We'll be happy to share them with our guests today and then pass along their responses to you at a later date. Having said that, don't just restrict yourself to questions. Do give us a shout out and tell us how we are doing. Your comments and feedback will not just encourage us, but will also help us improve our programs in the future. With that said, it's time to introduce our panel. First up, she's an experienced HR professional with over 12 years of experience, and she currently serves as the Vice President and Head of Global HR and Admin at WSO2. Udeshika Ratnavira is here with us today. Hello, Udeshika. Nice to have you on the show.
Varun, nice to be here.
Fantastic. And our next guest is also an HR professional whose career spans across multiple industries such as banking and finance, IT-enabled services, and manufacturing. He is currently the Associate Director, Human Resources at Fonterra. Rehan Anthony's is here with us today. Hello, Rehan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Varun. Pleasure to be here.
All right. And finally, he's a senior HR leader with a proven global track record with nearly 30 years of experience in both large scale organization and cultural transformation, as well as HR functional transformation in MNCs and large regional family owned businesses. He currently serves as the Chief Talent and Learning Officer at Jardine Matheson in Hong Kong. Peter Atfill is here with us today. Hello, Peter. Thank you for joining us.
Hi everyone, great to be here.
The pleasure is ours. Welcome to the show. All right, so let's dive straight in. So last week we spoke about innovation, and we spoke about this term innovation and how it's a term that's largely misunderstood and confused with the notion of inventing. The word engagement also falls in a similar territory, and it's loosely thrown around these days, and most companies falsely believe that engagement is the only way to create engagement is to throw parties or events and whatnot. So I'd like to start with you, Deshika. What does the term engagement mean to you?
So I think for me, I think if personally I was looking at it, it would be like the level of involvement I have in the company, right? Or in general with anything, right? Engagement could be in any particular area. So in general, I think we all think they're pretty unique, but at the end of the day, we all have the same basic needs, right? In terms of respect, we all want to be respected. We want the trust factor. We want to be able to make our own mistakes. We want to know what is happening in the companies in terms of communication. It should be transparent, open, and we want recognition as well, right? So for me, like those key components are very important if we want to engage with regard to employees. And even for me, like why would I get up in the morning? Why do I want to go to work? Why do I want to do these things? Why do I want to show this level of passion? Like look at doing things creatively, being innovative in the company, all those things, that for me is involvement. It's not just the activities that you do, but basically how the company really appreciates employees, and it's like I scratch your back, you scratch my back kind of thing, right? We look after each other kind of thing, right? And I feel that if companies genuinely do that, have that those values inbuilt into the company system, then employees automatically look after the company, so that engagement level automatically builds from there.
Sure. Thanks, Udeshika, for that. Rehan, any thoughts on that before we go on to Peter?
So I'll give you a very human definition of
Sure.
what I consider not engagement, but rather a highly engaged individual, right? Um, if you look at our day-to-day lives, if you dive deep into what really stimulates our behavior, uh, love is one of those profound emotions, right? So if you love
Yeah.
somebody, you're capable of doing unimaginable things, right? There's a level of motivation and drive and passion in you that helps you achieve beyond what you thought was possible. So if I was to equate an engaged employee to an employee who's deeply in love with his or her organization, to me that would be somebody who is highly engaged. Right? Now, the relevance of that in today's context is a different topic, but that is how I would loosely define what a highly engaged employee.
Oh, that's a good definition. Thanks, Ryan. Peter, what are your thoughts on engagement? What is it to you?
Well, I guess Varun, I'd share your opening comment that it's a remarkably ill-defined term, I think, and every HR person, every consultancy, every researcher will have a different take on what it is, and I think that therein lies half of the problem, right? I've never been a big believer in sort of generic models like Gallup's Q12 or the old Aon Hewitt model of what was it, say, stay or strive, or the equivalent of those models. They make I think the broad sweeping assumption that all organizations are broadly the same in the same context, etc. I think the answer to this question is actually one of the issues that organizations really need to sort of answer for themselves before they embark on an engagement sort of initiative, which is engagement in what, right? What do you want people to be engaged in? And obviously, words like purpose and strategy and values and goals and I guess belief and trust and senior leadership and all of those things would come up in answer to that question. And the way an organization frames sort of survey questions, if you like, around that would be very different in every case. But for me, I think the one thing that I don't disagree with what Rehan said. Actually, Rehan said in terms of the word love. I think that's an interesting word in a corporate environment, but I'd add to that it's all very well for me to be in love with my organization, but if I'm only in love with them because they have great canteen and great learning and development programs or whatever it might be, I think there's an added dimension, which is I would want my engaged people to be actively trying to improve the business outcomes, business results of the organization, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. So I love my organization and I really want it to win in the market. And for me, I'd add that dimension to the word love, which I think is an interesting way to capture all of the soft stuff that becomes important.
Sure, absolutely, Peter. And here's an interesting term that I keep coming across, and I've been in meetings where CEOs and directors have used this. They've said, okay, if this was your company, what would you do? And they keep saying that. And then I have employees kind of saying, no, it's not our company, and so that it's a huge red flag in terms of are they truly engaged in the organization, and just to further to kind of further expand on what you just said, Peter. So how do you create engagement like in that sense? So even in that example, I mean the CEO didn't have any ill will. I mean he or she simply mentioned that or would rather would like you to take action or to make decisions as if it was your own company. And then when an employee turns around and says it's not my company, and then so how would you, in that kind of an environment, how would you create engagement? What would you do if you were in the CEO's shoes? This is open to the panel, and then we can go around the table. Who'd like to take a stab at that?
Yeah, let me have a go first, Varun, at that. So, look, I think there are two issues. Well, first of all, let me sort of state a position. I'm not one of the naysayers that says engagement is a load of is full of myths and full of hogwash and whatever. I've been around this for 15 years, and I actually believe the science, and I think it's a good thing. Lots of issues with it, but we can talk about those later. But that's where I sort of start from. I think there are two issues that organizations need to face up to here. One is what I said before, is engagement in what, and let's be very clear about that. And I think the second thing I'd say is, in my experience of this, it's not about, we can sort of we can get carried away, as particularly as HR people, and managing a survey process and managing response rates and managing the software and managing but at the end of the day, we all know it's about action, it's about implementation, it's about and I think the key thing that I'd say there is, it's about aligning all of the sort of organization systems, policies, processes, culture, to wrap it all up in a word. Look, if we say, well, managers need to be better at career development, well, what are we doing to hold them accountable? What are we doing to, put KPIs in their goals? What are we doing to promote people that do it well and not promote people that don't? All of those be consistent. But I think the other thing that I'd also say is, if where I've seen this sort of measurement be most successful is when you've got a CEO that actually believes in it too, right? Where and I don't care if it's engagement or pick a measure, it doesn't really matter. But if there's some sort of englobing, overall people effectiveness, people satisfaction, people engagement measure that he cares about or she cares about, you've got half a chance of winning. So I think I guess I'd sum it up and say leadership have to understand, have to care. We need to be clear what we want people to be engaged in, and thirdly, we need to sort of have all the actions and implementation happening in a sort of 360 aligned, congruent way that people can see, and etc. So that'd be my 2 cents worth on that.
Oh, fantastic.
I actually echo Peter's sentiments. Firstly, are you asking how can we create an engaged employee base, right? To me, an engagement is a result of a series of actions, right? So to get an engaged employee, it's a series of actions that you would do over a period of time that will result in somebody being being so emotionally attached to your organization that they'd be willing to give discretionary effort. However, in a real world situation, it's all about the results, right? And let's not hide behind any camouflages here. Your business is driving results, right? And it is who are my best capable people that can get me to that destination or that milestone, right? So for me to speak from a Fonterra perspective, how we look at it is that if you take a 3 to 5 year horizon, we kind of define what our strategic priorities are, and we completely understand that the world that we operate in, especially in the industry we operate in, is extremely complex. And it's volatile, it's susceptible to changes, and we want our employees and our processes and systems to be so agile that they can respond to changes. They can respond to goalposts being changed on a regular basis. You wouldn't want people to resist it, right?
Sure.
Now, in that lens, how we kind of look at engagement is how do we set very specific directions? How do we come up with, I don't mean to sound too technical, but how do we come up with a plan of execution where people are aligned to what we're trying to do? Right? So I'm not going to go into detailed roster of all the actions that we would kind of take.
Right.
But all I can say is that even the actions that we do plan are subject to change from time to time, right? It's all about how we create a very strong base for employees to operate in. So the ways of working, for example, right,
Right.
is something that you wouldn't want changing although the external environment changes, right? Collaboration is a hygiene factor to this. So if you have the
Sure.
ways of working set in stone, and you hire people who fit into that way of working, by and large, right, and you nurture people into that ways of working, then the probability that year on year or over a defined period of time, whatever action plan you have to get people to continuously be engaged in the priorities that you have set,
Right.
becomes a very real possibility.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, for sure. Udeshika, what do you think? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think a few things. I think in terms of leadership, it's really important at the end of the day, level of engagement, what you're expecting in terms of level of engagement from employees is very dependent on leadership, right? Because you have to genuinely want something if you want others to follow you. That is one thing. The second thing is, I think, how much of engagement you want from people, because the thing is you need to have that steady balance, their work and life, right? We can give everything, like in office we have a place for people. At WSO2 we have a snooze room, we give dinner, we give
Right.
lunch, we give breakfast, we give all these things, but sometimes you think and wonder whether are we doing the right, because we have a gym, we have like, is that the right thing? Because they should have some, I mean, this is their work at the end of the day, right? I mean, we
Right.
want them to love the work, but we want them to also have a life at the end of the day. Family is
Sure.
important, right? I think
Sure.
this whole COVID situation has kind of really changed even the way I personally think in terms of whether people work from home, whether, because earlier we were not so. I mean, we had the flexibility in workplace, but then like whether people want to work from home and all that. But now, like with this situation, we realize it doesn't matter where you're working from as long
Mm, right.
engaged. I think it's in. I think that that component of the work-life balance is also really important to think of when you're trying to engage people. Like how much of engagement do you want from them? But I think the leadership factor is one of the most important things, because what exactly we want, what are we practicing? Because you've got to walk the talk at the end of the day, right? So
Right. Right.
if HR may want to put things in place. But if the
Sure.
leadership is not demonstrating that, you cannot. It's impossible, right? So it's sometimes it's very important to figure out what it is. And also, I think one thing to keep in mind is that not all employees are going to be. You can't get 100% engagement from everybody, right? Because
Sure.
everybody has
Yeah.
different viewpoints. They come from different frameworks. So to a certain level, you can. But I think just how do you get people to be really passionate about what they do is very important to look at, and how you get it out of them, like so. But I think leadership is important. Second tier leadership, whoever is managing teams, is important, like to align all those things in place, and to genuinely look at the human aspect.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So here's an interesting thing. I've just joined a webinar earlier this week by MIT. They were talking about sustaining wait, what's the topic? Sustaining culture when everyone's remote. And they use the word engagement a lot of times, and during the discussion, and they were saying that sometimes it started off fine, but then as you start to work, continue to work from home over a prolonged period of time, this particular, she was that's her core area, and she was saying how even the culture was beginning to kind of unravel, deteriorate, and to a certain extent, engagement levels were dropping, and organizations were finding it very difficult to sustain such engagement, especially because there's no human contact and so on. So I think it's worth us exploring that aspect How do you retain engagement and thereby protecting your organization culture? How do you retain it? Or if you're an organization that hasn't really thought about engagement, is there anything that they can do at this point? Since most of the companies are continuing to work from home while only a portion are returning back. Any thoughts on that?
So, can I go first?
Yeah.
So I think I'll just give you some examples from WSO2, because obviously this situation we had to really think about how we are going to do things, how we're going to engage teams, and engaging teams was one of our key things. So one thing we looked at doing was we are looking at developing this whole working from home, like in this current situation policy. One of the main reasons is because, like, when you're working from home, it's different to working from office, right? There are various, you have, some people have children, some people have parents, and you can't just switch off when you're at home, right? So you have to give some kind of guidelines for people to operate, and I think giving that flexibility to people is important, because they need to understand that the company really understands these challenges you're going through, because you can have internet problems, electric cuts, all these things are there, right? So that is one thing. And I think the second thing is we are trying to, like, empower team leads to try and do more things within their teams, as much as possible. So we have special programs to see, and it doesn't have to be the same program that every team does, because each team is different, dynamics are different, working hours are different. But whatever works for them to kind of figure it out on their own. So the team has that flexibility to kind of decide what they want to do.
Okay.
Varun, could I add?
Yeah.
I think if you look at some, I saw some research the other day that was, I think, conducted across Europe and the US, and it basically said that, currently, most companies are seeing a big uptick in engagement at the moment.
Right.
I think largely driven by the fact that, they've all been forced to sort of dial up the empathy sort of factor that, in terms of, understanding the sort of situations that Deshika was just talking about, or worrying about mental health, or worrying about sort of furniture for working at home, or in our case, we invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a whole bunch of new learning and development activities available across the whole organization. And it's not surprising in situations like that people say, oh, okay, well, the organization, it's all, but for me, it's sort of somewhere down the bottom end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs triangle here, that, the organizations are probably doing more in that space than they've ever done before. Which is showing in people's perception of how engaged they are. I actually think there's another factor in play here, which those of us who are still lucky enough to have a job, feel very thankful for that, because there's hundreds of thousands, millions of people across the world that are losing their jobs, and through no fault of their own or their organization in many cases. And I think that's also there's a survival factor, I think, in play here as well, that is important to recognise. So I probably contradict the view of the MIT person, because that's not what the research is showing right now.
Right. Ryan,
Varun, I'd actually take a different lens here. I wouldn't use the word engagement here, actually. Say, if you take the past couple of months, you need to kind of dissect it. So you have the initial shock the world kind of underwent when a pandemic of this nature suddenly hit the planet, right? So you have the shock of it. On the other hand, you have the effect of what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to my organization, how are we going to kind of thrive in this environment, right? My personal viewpoint is that in a situation such as this, it's not about engagement, but it's about situational agility and situational leadership. Yeah. How do you kind of respond to it very quickly in terms to give assurances to people on exactly how your business is going to maneuver this challenge or this situation. Number one, right? And
Right.
being extremely clear and extremely decisive in what you're going to do, right? If it's job security that you're going to give, or is it job insecurity that's going to kind of flutter around the tiers you have in the organization? That is how that's the decision the leadership needs to take, right? So for me, this whole period is not about actually engagement. It's about how do I kind of get my people to be focused, still passionate about the work they do, irrespective of whether it's from their living room or from their office. How do I get that excitement going? Where do I invest the money? So I would rather look at it from a situation of how do we manage this particular incident, as opposed to thinking more in the lines of, okay, how am I going to continually work on people to uplift their feelings and emotions towards the organization. It's more about decisiveness. It's more about giving them very clear guidelines and saying, no, this is how we are going to move forward and make things work and make things happen. So that is the lens I would more take in terms of what happened in the past couple of months, or maybe going to the next couple of months.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Rehan. I don't think there'd be too many business leaders or heads of HR or whatever sort of thing. What am I going to do in the next month to drive up engagement? That's sort of irrelevant, right? It's more about what you've just said. How do I keep my business running and, keep my people sort of, enthused and resilient and all of those things, rather than worrying too much about, the niceties of engagement more broadly.
Right. Absolutely.
And I think in terms of this current situation, I think it's important to keep, because the thing is, some companies are working 100%, some may be 1/3, some may be 100% working from home model, right? But I think keeping people informed with what is happening, how the company is doing, all those things are very important. So maybe like town halls, and even just finding out how people are doing in general, like satisfaction surveys, all those things help to kind of gather more information, because everybody's not going to say what they're experiencing, or team leads kind of check with their team members how things are doing, but it needs to be fed back into the organization to kind of figure out what are we going to do, because it's not the challenge just for the organization, it's a challenge for everybody at the end of the day, right? So that component is also important.
Oh, yeah. For sure. How do you measure engagement though? Is there something companies can do, or are you in your respective positions? Is there something that you guys use to measure, or like how does that work?
Engagement per se, like we are not measuring like that, but we do have a quarterly employee survey. It is an anonymous survey that we run. And most often people give a lot of feedback, so we capture a few areas. One thing is about them, individual, then the team, about the team lead, the team composition, how work is delegated, all that component, and then the company, like the strategy, whether they're clear about the strategy, leadership team, all those things. So that we do on a quarterly basis, and then we share the feedback, we share everything. So anyway, it's anonymous, right? So we share everything with everybody, and we give feedback on what we are going to do, what we can do, what we can't do. We give feedback on those things. But
Rehan, Peter, any thoughts on measurement? Yeah.
Well, when it comes to human psychology, I'm not the biggest fan of a metric being there in place. 1 + 1 is not always 2. However, there are some instruments that are available. So Peter was mentioning the Gallup 12-question survey, etc., that is available for you to kind of get a pulse on how engaged your people are within your organization. But that is not something that I totally advocate. It's almost like me asking my wife how much she loves me. I don't think she can. It's a pointless exercise. Yeah. However, what I do like to see is that every employee should have their own P&L. Yeah. So every employee should be able to kind of, in their own way, kind of measure the contribution they are making to an organization. Yeah. And can it be monetized or not? Yeah. If that is the play, then your business results should automatically indicate how engaged your employees are. If not, you can have a fantastically fabulous, top quartile engagement result, but your business has not met its targets for the year. It's almost like saying the operation was a success, but the patient is dead.
Right.
You know, so that is my take on it. I mean, if organizations want to use a tool or an instrument to measure how emotionally connected they are to the business, they can kind of go out there and shop around. I'm sure they will find something, but I wouldn't necessarily advocate for that.
Sure.
Yeah,
Peter, I'm sure you have a
Varun, I used to lead for 4 years, from 2004 to 2008, the Global People Survey in Unilever, and when I was based in London, and so I've been there, done that with 30%, 40%, 50%, 60, 70, 80% engagement scores, and getting all excited about that and comparing it to the benchmark by sector, by country, by etc. etc. I've been there, and I've done all of that before. I've already said I'm not a fan of generic tools like Q12 or most of the consulting models. My answer to the question would be, however you measure it, it needs to be bespoke for your organization. I'm inclined to Rehan's view that 1 + 1 can equal 2 one day and 3 the next. So be careful with the numbers, but nevertheless. And I have almost zero interest in comparing it to the industry, to my competitors, to my geography or whatever, because we're different, and all companies are different, and they should be comparing themselves to themselves, because the construct of what they're measuring should be different, in my opinion. So I think it's I go back to what I said. It's the key here is it's about action, and it's about congruent action. It's about implementation. How you get what you need to work on is there's a million ways to do it, right?
Sure.
And just to add from some experience, to also this, the thing is the survey is pretty dependent on moods of people also, right? So if there are certain decisions that are taken by the organization at that point which are not very favorable to everybody, then the survey results are also not the greatest, right? So I think that is important to kind of figure out, because survey we have a question on compensation. Now, not like we change compensation every quarter, but because it's a quarter survey, you can see this spike going up, down. Some days, some quarters they're happy, some quarters, which makes no sense, because at the end of the day we do the revisions, it's annual. So we also have to rethink on certain things, right? So I also agree, like surveys won't give you 100% accurate picture, but kind of give you some kind of indication.
So I think something that we've been discussing might have struck a nerve, because we do have a comment from an audience member. So I'm just going to read this out and leave out the name of the company that they're referring to. So this anonymous comment says, since working from home, I've been consistently working for 12 hours every day, even weekends sometimes. I am reluctant to participate in events or engagement activity, because I feel the company is just doing this for a certification. If they care, they won't give us work or set up meetings after hours. Any thoughts on that? It's not a question, it's just a comment that came through. Any thoughts on this, on doing certain things simply for a certification, or do those certifications mean you're engaged, or like any and you can even touch on the working extra, if that makes sense.
I think my advice to whoever gave that comment is, I think you need to escalate certain issues you have, right? Because if you have
Right.
it in you and you're going through this problem, the thing is, I don't know, depending on the organization, whether something's going to happen about it. But I think as individuals, we have to take a stand sometimes, and escalate it and see whether something can happen about it. Because if this is the expectation of the company, now is not the right situation, but you need to decide that this is what you want to do in the long run as well, right? So
Right.
the thing is, if you don't do something about it, other people are also not going to know, right? So at WSO2, what we say is, you don't talk about problems. You bring it either to your lead or you bring it to HR. Try and do something about it and address it,
Right.
especially if it's on this long working hours and things like that, right? Because those are things as it's our responsibility to manage for individuals as well.
Right. Right. Brian, Peter, any thoughts on
Um,
that?
yes, I agree with the person who made that comment, saying, yes, the moment you switched into working remotely, it seems like you're doing long hours, etc., etc. I completely agree with that. And one of the reasons for that is possibly because in that particular organization, they've been working in a comfort zone, right? So you've been
Right.
working essential 9 to 5 or 10 to 8 or whatever it may be, right? So you're working in that comfort zone, and now it's been disrupted. Yeah.
Right.
So the moment it's gotten disrupted, everyone, it's not just that particular individual, but the entire organization is trying to adapt to this new reality, right? And there's
Right.
a learning curve in any new thing that you put your hands into, right? So the important thing is, like Udeshika said, the important thing is the moment you start operating outside of your comfort zone, you need to keep the channels of feedback open,
Right.
right? That is the only way that you can kind of make a disruption a new normal, right? So you've got to keep the channels of feedback open, and you've just got to kind of, grow out of that challenge of working extensive hours because you are now not controlled in a tighter space, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things that, both you and the organization have to kind of adapt to. Will it take some time? Most certainly. And then just kind of go out of it and come to a point of equilibrium.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
my take is that's normal.
Yeah. 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 Peter, have you experienced this? Have you seen?
Yeah, no,
things
I would share the views the others have already mentioned. Look, I think it's a fact that we're all working 12-hour days, and Zoom fatigue is real, right? And if there's yet another sort of company meeting or event that I have to go to in hour 13, I think my take on it would be, I think it depends on what it is, right? If it's if it's something that is genuinely sort of trying to explore how things can be improved for the good of everyone, for the sake of the company, for the sake of the customer, for whatever it is, and it's in my 13th hour of the day, well, maybe if I feel strongly enough in being part of a solution, well, I'll get involved. If it's let's have virtual drinks again because it's Friday, it's like, well, actually, no, I'd rather be with my family or something like that. And so it's a bit hard to generalize, I think, in that, but I share the sentiment that 12-hour days really are wearing thin, I think, for many people.
Sure, Peter. I'm so glad you brought up virtual drinks because we did get a question regarding that. So this particular individual, let me see. Yeah, her question is, we've tried hosting virtual coffee during the work from home period. The attendance is very poor, and those who join don't say much. How do I make this a success?
I think it's important to figure out what works for the team, because
Right.
some people may want to drink, some people may not want to drink, whether it's coffee, and it depends on timing. I think it's important. I think leads, it's important to figure out the mechanics of the team in general and figure out what kind of works, because That's what we realize. We can't really do the same thing for everybody. We are just telling them do something which kind of, because the thing is like, when you're working from home, the level of engagement with people is less. Like in office, even though we are in office, say 9 to 5:30, majority of the time you spend talking to people, engaging with people, and it's the that's how it happens, right? So the thing is
Sure.
like, how do you at least replicate that while working from home? Like, how are you going to do that? But I think team leads need to kind of figure it out, or with the team, or whatever it is that works, because say for example at WSO finance team, you can't have this Friday drink because nobody drinks in the finance team. Right? So maybe it's
All right.
good, but you need to kind of understand your team and what really works for the team and figure it out. And I just want to add one more point to the earlier thing. I
Sure.
think it's important for people to be a little bit self-critical, because
Right.
are you really sitting down and working 12 hours? Because at home, honestly, like I spend time with my kid. Sometimes I go to Keels, to the grocery shop. I have to do all those things because I'm working from home. Like I can't get away from it and do it
Right.
when I'm coming home, kind of thing, right? So you need to also think whether, because you have this flexibility. Sometimes, like sometimes people think they do all these things, but still you're putting all these hours in, right? So you're doing it because you have flexibility also. So either because nobody really sits down and works 8 hours. You can't. I mean, I can't do it.
Right.
But I think it's important for people to think about that aspect as well.
Sure.
Well, in terms of virtual drinking, I've done it a few times and it's been a great success. But the key is in whatever you do, how authentic are you? That is the key. Yeah.
Right.
Because people can really sense and feel authenticity. Yeah. The moment you try to force feed something, the moment you try to do something just to have a tick in the box, you're not going to get a positive response. Yeah.
Right.
So exactly what Udeshika said, whatever fits into the norms of your team, and the relationships you build up with your teams, what's going to make that happen either virtually or in a cafe somewhere.
Sure.
So
Sure.
for me, it's authenticity.
Yeah. Peter, I know you touched on that. Is there anything that you've kind of done in your organization, or you've seen that organizations do that kind of counteract that? Is there anything that you would like to share that might
No,
help?
I wouldn't add anything to what Rehan and Udeshika have already said, Varun. I think authenticity is key. I think understanding what's going to work, it'll be different with every team. We've tried all sorts of different things, singing happy birthday virtually is terrible, by the way. I've done it 3 times now, and every time it was dreadful. I think it's important to try stuff like that, and
Right.
all bosses need to find a way to sort of keep the team sort of aligned and on message and up to date and all of those sorts of things. And if that means we drink some coffee or have a beer at the end of the day, then fantastic. But if it doesn't, then for me, equally fine, right? So
Yeah. All right, so for those of you who are just joining us, we're in conversation with Udeshika, Rehan, and Peter on the myths about engagement. We are getting quite a lot of audience questions, so I'm just going to ask you one other area that I wanted to explore, and then we can move into the audience questions, because I believe those questions would cover a much larger or broader area, so to speak. Can you, so here's my question. Can you be engaged if you're doing something that you don't love? And as someone I've personally seen when we've interviewed, we have individuals who have either done degrees, or their areas of expertise is a completely different area. We've seen such individuals come in to the workplace, and we've heard stories as well. We've talked to other HR professionals in the industry, and where you do have certain individuals coming into a certain job, which are probably not something that they envision that they do, but they're doing fine. But so can you be engaged doing something that you don't love, or can you grow to love a job and then grow to be engaged? Any thoughts on that?
So I think yes, you can. Like you have to take medicine, you don't really like to take medicine, you take it because it serves a purpose, right? So I
Right.
think understanding the purpose in things is important, because even if you don't necessarily like something, but you know why you're doing it, I think then yes. But at the end of the day, you have to really you have to sell it to people, right? Because you
Mm,
can't just expect people to do things just because you say things. You have to really tell
right.
them why you're doing it, what's the outcome of it. So I think yes, it's possible. Maybe no,
Uh,
but most often.
Yeah,
I
sorry,
sorry,
Rehan,
Peter,
go.
go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, I think it very much. I could buy what Yudeshika just said. If it's like, I've hired a personal trainer because I know that if I don't, I'm going to have a heart attack, and I can be engaged in that process. I think in the context of organizations, it's very hard to pretend for too long. I think.
Right.
I've left 3 or 4 companies in my career because I just didn't, going back to my point about engaged in what, I couldn't relate to the purpose, the values, the strategy, the culture, the whatever it might be, and I just left because what's the point? Life's too short. So my answer would be no if you're talking about corporate life. For any length of time. Obviously, you can do anything for a period if it serves a purpose, like to learn a new skill, a new area or something. But I don't think you can pretend for too long.
Oh, yeah. And Rehan, you were
Completely,
going to.
completely echo with both what both said. When a gun is held to your head, you probably do something really well. But for how long is the question? So it's not sustainable to expect somebody to do something they have absolutely no passion and drive to do for too long. It's probably a short-term gain at best. Yeah.
Right. Right.
That's one of the real challenges that most businesses have today. Do I have the right person, right role? I mean, it's so subjective. I mean, if somebody could give me a metric for that, that would be great. So
Yeah.
that's what.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm with you on that. All right. So let's open up for audience question. Sorry, Deshika, you were going to say something?
I think in terms of short-term things, I also agree with both. Like there's certain things that you could say okay and understand, but in the long term, if you're not happy in the long term, you've got to move out. Either you try and fix things, or it's no point staying because you're toxic to yourself, to the company as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Okay, let me see. Let me read this question. Right. So my company gets feedback from the staff to improve engagement, but then no one knows what happens to those suggestions, and no one does anything about it. Say, isn't the question, but it seems to be like a comment or a feedback. Anything to share with this particular individual? Again, this individual says that company obtains your feedback to improve engagement, but then no one knows what happens thereafter. Like nothing happens.
So I think
my recommendation would be to tell the company to stop spending the money doing the survey, because they're wasting their time.
I think ideally what should happen is, like any feedback you get, you share some response to it, because people take the time to share the feedback. But even I think from my side, even I have not sometimes responded to certain feedback and shared it, kind of thing, right? But ideally, because the thing is, you can't do everything everybody says, and it could be just one person, it could be the same person saying the same feedback over and over again. But I think it's good to respond to people, because they actually take the time to put in this thing, because obviously it's bothering them, and or they want to make a genuine suggestion about something. It may not be the most practical, but at least some kind of explanation is good. We try and do that as much as possible, but sometimes this particular thing has happened as well in our side. So.
I feel that most organizations, maybe even HR functions, go wrong is when they don't communicate the purpose of a survey or any feedback that they're trying to get. Yeah. So when you don't set the expectation at the onset,
Right.
then people automatically expect a different response. Yeah. Because language is a conspiracy between two people, right? So, you can say something to me, I will interpret it in the way I want, and I will give you something back, right?
Right.
So, in my opinion, any kind of survey is not to give a response back to the people, but rather gather information by the party that sends out the survey. Yeah, and how you choose to use that information is purely based on a strategy that you have. Right?
Sure.
So whenever you send out a document, asking for responses from people, please be clear about what you want it for and what you're going to do with that information. Then you will not have this issue of, I haven't gotten a response, nothing has changed out of the survey. It's very simple, basic things that organization misses out on.
Right. Yeah. Sure. All right. Thank you for that. The next question, this is directed at Peter, but I guess the rest of the panel can pitch in as well. There are several knowledge gaps in my company, and the L&D team is planning to design and roll out mini courses online. How can we successfully do this and create engagement among our staff?
Well, I guess it probably, any sort of learning design for me starts with, are we very clear on the problem we're trying to solve, the skill we're trying to build, the competency we're trying to develop, the roles we're trying to sort of ready people for in the future, et cetera, et cetera. So if I make an assumption that this organization has done all of that stuff very well, then I guess they should have people clamoring for places in these programs, right? Because they're meeting needs that the organization is very clearly expressed. I think the other thing that we've learned a lot ourselves on in the last 12 months is the world of sort of virtual learning and e-learning and all that has been hugely disrupted in the last sort of 6 to 9 months, obviously from what it used to be. And I think we've seen some amazingly positive results actually from some of the stuff that we previously did face to face. We moved it virtual through necessity. And sort of praying almost that we weren't going to destroy the programs to find that we've actually had higher satisfaction rates in many cases than we did face to face. And I think the key to that is, so just to answer the question, I think you better make sure that your learning vendor or whoever's doing the design of this is thinking very carefully about what it takes to have an effective piece of virtual or e-learning these days. And that's a content question, it's a pedagogy question, it's a technology question, it's a facilitation style question, it's all of those things that you have to get right. Yeah, that would be my response, I think.
Pretty good insight. Rehan, Udeshika, anything that you can share with this particular person?
Can you repeat that question for me, please?
Oh, right. So basically, they've identified knowledge gaps in the organization. So they're in the process of the L&D team rather is in the process of putting together some online courses. So they want to know what can they do to ensure that these online courses are successful and that engagement is created through these programs is what they were asking.
So.
Sorry, Udeshika, you were saying something and then
I think it depends on the level of the person who is asking this particular question as well, right? If it's a manager level person or who has someone who is someone who has an impact in terms of the formation of the program and all that, then definitely they should give their feedback, right? They should get involved. But if not, still, I think they could give feedback also in terms of expectation. But I think it's difficult to say without knowing exactly what it is, kind of thing. It's a broad.
I think this person is a part of it because the way the question is structured, like I mean the last line, for example, says how can we successfully roll this out, and I guess the assumption is that the person is a part of the L&D team, is what I could gather rather from what is being written. But yeah.
I think in terms of online courses and all that, people have to understand that like we are all moving towards this global community, right? At the end of the day,
Right.
like even for us, like in Sri Lanka, we have this thing, people have to come attend programs physically, kind of thing. With this whole corona situation, we have like even I have changed how I think, and we have to really think if we want to grow as a global team where we want to hire people externally, all that, we have to be able to have certain online things. Of course, we will make mistakes along the way. We just have to learn from them and see how we can improve. So a steady way of getting feedback, all that is very important. And then you take it from there. But it all depends on organizations as well.
Sure. Rehan, anything to add before we ask our last audience question and then move on to the conclusion? Yeah.
I'm actually trying to think how to address. I can't seem to understand what the real concern in that question is. But if I was to make an assertion,
right,
the capability building is not just a simple exercise of identifying gaps and then coming up with strategies to fill those gaps.
Right.
I mean, if you have an organization with 1,000, 2,000 people, it's not practically possible to fill everyone's gaps in the company. It's not logical at all. So how do you kind of identify those learning gaps or capability or competency gaps that people do have, and what is the priority of them being filled? Have you given them feedback on it? Do they understand if they actually make an effort to learn these new skills, competencies, or are they enhance what they already have? Right. What's the outcome of it? Or what is actually going to come out of it? Is there a tangible benefit to the work that they do? Is there going to be a tangible benefit to their growth potential, to their future careers, etc., etc.? So that is how you make it attractive for people to participate, when they really know why they are going to be a participant and what they're going to get out of it. But I'm still struggling to kind of understand the real, core issue within that question.
No worries. Yeah. We'll So we'll reach out to this person, it's an anonymous question, but if if this person is clearly listening, do send us more details, and we'll then pass it along to the panel and ask for their input. Thank you for sending that. All right, so one more audience question, and then we'll go to the concluding question, and we'll wrap up since we actually almost out of time. Right, so this question comes in, again, another anonymous question. My company keeps forcing me to attend all their events and even have a KPI attached to it. Those who don't attend are looked down upon and get penalized during annual appraisals. Okay, it's not a question, it's another comment. It seems like what do you guys think about it? Good practice, bad practice, anything that they can do about it? I think.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. I think people are venting on the comment section. So so this particular person has written, my company keeps forcing me to attend all their events and even have KPIs attached to it. Those who don't attend are looked down upon and get penalized during the annual appraisals. And then that's where that ends. There's no question there. I guess they want your thoughts on it. And any thoughts on?
I think it's some personal advice to the person. If that's what the company wants, if you can do something about it, you can do something about it. But if that's the company wants, either you dance to that tune or you find another place that you like to dance.
All right, all right.
Good answer. Good answer. I would have said exactly the same thing.
Right. From an organization
I
point of
just
view.
said
Oh
deeper
yeah, Ryan,
sympathies.
sorry. Sorry, Ryan, we couldn't catch
I
that
just
last
said
one.
a deeper sympathies to whoever who said that.
Okay, so let me turn the let me kind of ask that question from the organization perspective. If you do have something like that, if you do have a KPI, should you relook at that and should you remove it? Should you update it? How should you tackle this? Like if you are in a senior management position and your organization does have a KPI for attendance for events, should you remove it or at least put forward a suggestion to relook at it? Any thoughts on that?
So I think events are done because in the thing is like companies are trying to promote some level of uh, engagement within teams which are informal, right? Even we have this problem. There are some people who don't like to attend any night events,
Right.
senior level people. But what we say is try and attend some events because at the end of the day, you lead by example. So then what's
Right.
the point in us having any activities if the leadership is not interested in this? So it's difficult. You have to have a balance
Right.
because it's important for some people. But as leads, I think the thing is we have to take it from that we are people we have to demonstrate certain leadership behaviors that other people are going to follow, right? So
Sure.
sometimes we may not like certain things. Not that we have to. I don't think we should do it all the time, like force people to attend, but at least encourage people, motivate them to attend, and so that they understand what the purpose is in doing this. But I
Right.
think really tying it down to performance and all, if someone is really performing, some people may not like any other attending certain events, right? So that's a little bit unfair, but it depends on the organization.
Right. Right. I understand. Ryan, Peter, any thoughts?
Uh, okay. So clearly, no, I completely hear what Udeshika is saying, and I do agree that if you have made an investment into a particular activity, you would want maximum participation, right? Because you want a return out of that investment.
Sure.
But tagging it to a KPI is, I mean, wrong in every essence of the word, right? Because it should not be a performance indicator at all. It is not. I mean, it's completely wrong. Maybe there is another way of doing it. I mean, how I would encourage that organization to look at how they can stimulate people to attend.
Right.
So, what can they do to generate interest?
Sure.
Yeah, that's where they should kind of invest their time and efforts in, not just simply say I'm gonna put a KPI and measure you on it.
Right. Right.
It
Absolutely.
doesn't make it's not logical at all.
Yeah. Peter, any?
Nothing to add, Varun. I totally agree with what's been said. I certainly wouldn't be putting KPIs around something like that. But that said, obviously, if there's for me, it's a behavioural issue at the end of the day. And if you measure in your performance appraisal system in some way what and how, which most organisations are doing, if somebody's a chronic non-attendee because they're trying to make some sort of statement of, I don't know, then but it's not a KPI.
Right.
But it's very hard to generalize without the context is obviously the key point here.
Absolutely. All right. So with that, I'm afraid we're almost out of time. So before we wrap up, let me ask the panelists a question to end on a positive and hopeful note. So what would be the one thing that you would tell organizations, the one thing that they can do today to embrace and promote engagement at work? What the one tip or the one piece of advice you could give them? Who'd like to go first?
I think my thing is leadership has to decide what the expectation from employees in terms of engagement genuinely is, and then you can. The thing is, if you really believe it, you can live it, and then it drills down to within the organization.
Yeah. All right, Rehan, Peter?
I'd build on I'd build on that point. I think that that's key, and starting with the CEO, and and them understanding why they're doing it and what the drivers are and all that. And I just go back to what I've said before and be consistent. Be very clear about what engagement means for your organization, right? And it's not Q12. I guarantee you that. There'll be something much more specific for you. And secondly, to the other point I've made, and also a couple of the questions related to it as well, is if you're going to ask for feedback, do something with it, and right. do it in a way that is sort of holistic, congruent, 360 degrees. Don't play lip service to it. Do a proper job. Otherwise, don't bother. Would be my view.
Why? Thank you.
So my take would be. Again, don't look at it from an engagement lens.
Sure.
For most organizations, a vast majority of them today, the name of the game is survival, right?
Sure.
So what does your employees require in a moment of, or in a time like this, is very strong and decisive leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If information is very clearly communicated to you, you understand where the business is heading, the strategy in play, and if the leadership can instill confidence and faith that we as one can grow out of these problems or this situation, that is all you needed in this moment of time.
Sure. All right. Fantastic. Thank you for that. All right. With that said, I'm afraid we are out of time, and we come to a close of today's conversation on the myths about engagement. A big thank you to our guests, Udeshika, Rehan, and Peter. Thank you so much for being with us here today. It's been a pleasure. Do stay back for a few minutes after our live session has ended for a short debrief. And finally, a big thank you to the Luminary team and to our audience who tuned in both today and for the last 9 weeks. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm happy to announce that This, That, and the Other has been renewed for a second season. So we'll be back in about a month. So stay tuned to our social media pages for more details. I'm Varun Chandramohan. Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and see you next month.
Thanks, Varun.
Thanks all.
Thank you.